grow my confidence and be more comfortable while I'm out there playing.
Things may not be as smooth as they seem for Bronny James at the Los Angeles Lakers. The young guard has opened up about why he can no longer work with his coach, hinting at deeper issues behind the scenes. But the real reason is something no one saw coming, and this changes everything you thought you knew. The setup. Bronny James was never supposed to be a normal NBA story. From the moment the Los Angeles Lakers selected him 55th overall in the 2024 NBA draft, the question was never really about basketball. It was about legacy. It was about a father who had spent 2 decades bending the NBA to his will, and a son who now had to figure out how to exist inside that same machine without getting crushed by it. The Lakers handed Bronny a 4-year contract and a spot on the same roster as his father, LeBron James. That alone made history. No father and son had ever suited up together in NBA history at the professional level. That fact alone guaranteed Bronny would never play a single minute in obscurity. Every pass, every missed shot, every hesitation on the wing would be dissected by millions of people who had already decided what they thought of him before he ever touched an NBA floor. And then they hired Redick to coach this whole operation. Redick was brought in as head coach in June 2024, a man with 0 head coaching experience, but 15 years of NBA playing time and a sharp analytical mind built from years of broadcasting and podcasting. He also happened to be one of LeBron's closest friends in the league. The two had co-hosted the Mind the Game podcast together. When Redick got the job, the basketball world immediately understood what that meant. LeBron had a voice in this. The hire was designed, at least in part, to keep LeBron happy, to keep him in Los Angeles, and to keep the whole operation from imploding. So when Redick stood at the podium at Bronny's introductory press conference in July 2024 and made a point of correcting Bronny's own words when Bronny suggested things had been given to him, and Redick immediately pushed back. You had to pay attention to what was really happening. Redick said, "Rob and I did not give Bronny anything. Bronny has earned this. Bronny talks about his hard work. Bronny has earned this through hard work." That was a coach going out of his way in the very first public moment of this relationship to establish that no favoritism existed. He was drawing a line. He was telling the world, whatever you think is happening here, it is not happening on my watch. But the basketball world is not naive, and neither is anyone who has watched the Lakers operate over the last several years. Redick called Bronny Case Study 1 for the team's player development program, pointing to his athleticism, his point of attack defense, his shooting, and his passing as foundational building blocks.
And for us, prioritizing player development, we view Bronny as like Case Study 1, because his base level of feel, athleticism, point of attack defender, shooting, passing, there's a lot to like about his game.
That language, Case Study 1, is the language of a coach who believes in a project. It signals investment, it signals patience, and Redick, to his credit, did not hide behind vague encouragement. He was specific about what he liked in Bronny's game and specific about what needed to change. Those words gave Bronny a public foundation, but what happened in practice, in games, and in the moments the cameras caught on the sideline told a different story, a story that was building towards something neither Redick nor Bronny could fully control. The first real test came in October 2024 in Bronny's NBA preseason debut. He went 1 for 12 from the field against the Phoenix Suns, a performance that was cold by any standard. The basketball world jumped. The critics who had been waiting for exactly this kind of moment sharpened their knives, and Redick stood at the microphone and did what he had committed to doing. He balanced the criticism with the praise, pointing to what he saw as growth and comfort, noting Bronny was a totally different player from the year before. That was the Redick formula, and you started to see it emerge as a pattern. Acknowledge the failure, reframe it as development, point to the intangibles, and move forward. It was coach speak executed with the precision of a man who understood the media game better than most coaches in the league. Redick was a broadcaster before he was a head coach. He knew exactly what words would generate what headlines. For Bronny, the 2024-25 rookie season was a grinding, difficult introduction to what it meant to be an NBA player carrying the weight of being LeBron James's son. He averaged 2.3 points, 0.7 rebounds, and 0.8 assists per game in 6.7 minutes per night. Those numbers were not the numbers of a player making his mark. They were the numbers of a player trying to survive. And surviving in the NBA is not the same as thriving. But there were flashes. In March 2025, Bronny had a career-high 17 points against the Milwaukee Bucks, a performance that gave the basketball world a brief, tantalizing look at what could be possible. Redick responded by warning the rest of the league, "This is just the start, tying the projection directly to Bronny's potential as a conditioned, physically prepared athlete with physical tools, burst, and handle. The caveat was embedded right inside the praise. He was only showing you this because conditions were right. Get him in elite shape and the ceiling rises. Leave him in his current state and the floor collapses. That April 2025 moment near the end of the rookie season is also when Redick delivered what he would later describe as his most pointed message to Bronny all year. After a poor performance in the regular season finale against the Portland Trail Blazers, where Bronny shot 2 for 10, Redick pulled him aside and said, "My belief in you as a player can't be higher than your belief in you." That sentence is deceptively sharp. On the surface, it sounds supportive. Underneath, it is telling a young player that the problem is not coaching, not opportunity, not the system. The problem is you. The problem is belief. The problem is that you are getting in your own way. Redick gave Bronny an A+ as a professional in his rookie season, not for his basketball performance, but for how he handled the attention, good and bad, and for the fact that he refused to let the noise consume him. That is a meaningful distinction. Redick was telling anyone paying attention, I am separating the person from the player. The person is handling things beautifully. The player needs significant work. The offseason between year 1 and year 2 was supposed to be the turning point. Conditioning had been identified, loudly, publicly, repeatedly, as the single biggest thing standing between Bronny and a legitimate NBA career. In a July 2025 ESPN interview, Redick was as blunt as he had been all year. The biggest thing for Bronny is that he has to get in elite shape. That's the barrier of entry for him right now. And if he does that, I think he's got a chance to be a really fantastic player in the NBA. That is a coach drawing a clear, unmistakable line in the sand. Get in shape or stay where you are. And Bronny heard it. He said all the right things going into year 2. He credited the off-season work. He said he felt better, stronger, more ready. He said his conditioning improvements were showing up on both ends of the floor. Redick backed him up publicly, noting that Bronny was playing as hard as I can right now. But then the season started, and the preseason opener arrived, and Bronny went 1 for 12 again. This time against the Phoenix Suns in October 2025. The same shooting performance as the year before, the same cold night, and Redick, for the second year in a row, stood at the podium and deployed the formula. Acknowledge the failure, reframe it, point to the intangibles. And somewhere inside all of that, the relationship between Bronny James and JJ Redick was being tested in ways that were becoming harder and harder to hide. The frustration that had been simmering was about to come boiling to the surface, and it was going to happen on live television, with cameras rolling in front of millions of people who would slow it down and replay it and analyze every frame. What happened next in November 2025 changed the public conversation about Bronny, about Redick, and about whether this whole arrangement was actually working the way anyone claimed it was. The patience was running out, and everyone could feel it. Bronny himself was starting to feel the pressure differently in year 2. He admitted that at the start of his rookie season, I was under a lot of pressure, and credited the coaching environment and G League time with building his confidence back up. But pressure in year 2 is different. In year 1, you can hide behind inexperience. In year 2, the excuses narrow. The margin for grace shrinks. And the coach, who had been walking a very careful, very deliberate tightrope, was about to stop being careful. Analyst Coach Nick did not mince words when he broke down the footage.
How do you feel about the way Bronny James played?
So, it's unfair that he is there, is what I'm going to say. I think it's clear, like, what the reason why he's there is because LeBron, has kind of made sure he's there.
That is the unfiltered version of what much of the basketball world was thinking, but most people were too careful to say out loud, and Coach Nick was not finished.
He's just not an NBA player. He looks, in my mind, like almost like worse than he was.
Those words landed like a punch, not because they were surprising, but because they said plainly what the statistics were already showing quietly. And those statistics, heading into the heart of the 2025-26 season, were about to force JJ Redick to make a choice, a very public, very uncomfortable choice. The breaking point. The night that changed everything happened in November 2025 during a blowout win over the Milwaukee Bucks. On the surface, it was a good night for the Lakers. They won 119-95, a comfortable margin, the kind of game where coaches sometimes let younger players get meaningful minutes and build confidence. Bronny was in the starting lineup. His teammates were setting him up. Luka Doncic, who had arrived in Los Angeles via trade earlier that year, was drawing double teams and kicking the ball out to exactly the kind of open looks that Bronny needed, that Bronny had been coached all year to take without hesitation. Bronny passed, then he passed again, then he passed again. 3 wide open 3-point 3-pointers. 3 times, Bronny looked at the basket, looked at the ball, and decided the safer play was to move it to someone else. In any other situation, with any other player, a coach might pull him aside quietly, show him the film the next morning, have a calm conversation about decision-making. That is the normal way these things go. JJ Redick did not do that. What happened instead was caught on multiple camera angles. Redick was on the sideline, watching his carefully designed offensive system produce the exact looks it was supposed to produce, and watching his player refuse to take them. And right there, in front of everyone, Redick let it out. "Bronny, you gotta shoot the bleeping ball." That moment went viral immediately. Clips of it spread across every social media platform within hours. People slowed it down, zoomed in on Redick's face, read the words off his lips, and argued about what it meant. Was this a coach being appropriately demanding? Was this a coach who had lost his patience with a player who was wasting his time? Was this a sign that the whole arrangement, Bronny on the roster, LeBron's friend coaching the team, the whole carefully constructed narrative of merit and development, was starting to crack? Bronny addressed it after the game with a response that was mature and measured. He said he was focused on bettering himself off the ball. He talked about the 0.5 mentality, acting within half a second on open looks, and credited Redick for pushing him toward that mindset. He said he and Redick had talked through what needed to change. He took the coaching without complaint. Bronny said, "I'm trying to focus now on bettering myself off the ball. Me and JJ have talked about all the ball handlers on the parent team, so I have to learn how to be effective off the ball. Have a 0.5 mentality, shoot the ball when I have open shots, and try to get better at that. That is exactly what a coach wants to hear." And Redick, by his own account, had been working on this with Bronny since the early days of their relationship. He acknowledged that Bronny initially had the opposite of 0.5 mentality, meaning instead of acting within half a second, Bronny was hesitating, overthinking, letting the window close before he made a decision. G-League time had helped, reps in practice had helped, but the habit of hesitation was proving stubborn. The 0.5 mentality is not a complicated concept. It simply means when you catch the ball with an open look, your brain processes it and your body responds in less than half a second. That is what separates functional NBA shooters from players who overthink. And what the viral Bucks clip showed, brutally clearly, was that Bronny had not yet solved this problem. Not in a real game, not with stakes, not when it counted. That same month, Redick was being blunt with the broader media about what he needed from Bronny. He acknowledged that conditioning setbacks, including illness, could disrupt the physical progress Bronny needed to make, and he stressed the importance of consistent vigilance in diet, sleep, and work habits. He was quoted saying, "That's the barrier of entry for him right now." The phrase barrier of entry is stark language. It means you have not yet paid the price of admission. You are standing outside the door. You have to earn the right to walk through it. Meanwhile, the broader dynamic inside the Lakers organization was generating its own kind of turbulence. Luka Doncic had arrived in Los Angeles and immediately become the center of gravity for the offense. LeBron was in his second decade of being the defining personality of any locker room he entered. And JJ Redick, a first-year head coach turned second-year head coach, was managing a roster full of enormous personalities, enormous contracts, and enormous expectations. Into this mix, Bronny's limited contributions were increasingly difficult to defend on basketball grounds alone. His numbers through the 2025-26 season told a difficult story. 2.1 points per game, 0.5 rebounds, 1.2 assists, and just 7.2 minutes per night across 31 appearances. His field goal percentage had risen from his rookie year, from 31.3% to 39.7%, but the volume was so low that the improvement was nearly meaningless in terms of real impact. His PER sat around 9.6, well below the league average of 15. His overall plus-minus was 20, meaning the team was being outscored when he played. These are not the numbers of a developmental success story. These are the numbers of a player who has not found his footing. Redick had not stopped coaching him hard. After a tough game against the 76ers in January 2025, where Bronny went 0 for 5 with multiple turnovers, Redick said plainly he didn't play well. He also acknowledged that he may have put him in a tough spot by thrusting Bronny into that game amid injuries, before pivoting back to expressing confidence in his energy and long-term potential. That back and forth, harsh assessment followed immediately by vote of confidence had become Redick's signature move with Bronny. Critics began to notice it. Some called it performative. Some called it a no-win tightrope walk for a coach who could not afford to look soft on LeBron's son, but also could not afford to alienate the player's father. The structural tension was building. LeBron's relationship with Redick, the podcast friendship that had been so central to Redick's hiring, was now a complicating factor in every decision involving Bronny. How do you coach someone's son hard when you are that close to the father? How do you maintain credibility as an impartial evaluator when the entire league knows why you got the job? These were not just media narratives. These were real questions with real consequences for how Redick operated. And then December 2025 came, and Redick's frustration expanded beyond Bronny. During a blowout loss to the Phoenix Suns, Redick was caught visibly fuming on the sideline as LeBron stood near the Suns bench, laughing and chatting with a former teammate instead of paying attention to the game. Redick called Bron multiple times. LeBron kept chatting. Redick burned a timeout. That moment showed something important. Redick's accountability had no ceiling. He was not protecting anyone from it. Not LeBron, not Bronny, not Luka. He had ripped into the entire team after that game saying, "We don't care enough right now." That is a coach who has decided the time for careful framing is over. Then in March 2026, the Luka Doncic sideline incident erupted. During a 129-101 blowout win over the Golden State Warriors, Redick subbed Doncic out late in the game. Doncic walked past Redick without accepting a fist bump, brushing off the coach's attempt to engage. Redick followed him to the bench. They exchanged words. Doncic stood up as if to continue the argument. Teammate Jared Vanderbilt stepped in to de-escalate. Lip readers and reporters interpreted Redick as saying things including, "What's your problem? You pushed my hand away. What are you upset about?" Followed by an instruction to sit down. Doncic responded defensively before Vanderbilt created space. Redick called it very normal afterward, saying they laughed about the moment and that their relationship dated back nearly a decade. ESPN's Dave McMenamin confirmed the narrative. Much ado about nothing, with both men described as fiercely competitive. A source close to Doncic emphasized their strong bond, and later Doncic even gifted Redick a jacket. By February 2026, Redick had declared Bronny a key piece of the Los Angeles Lakers' future and completely off limits in trade talks. That sounds like a vote of confidence. But in the context of everything else happening, the shrinking minutes, the G League shuttles, the roster additions squeezing Bronny out, it also reads like a coach, managing a situation that was becoming increasingly uncomfortable. You do not announce that a player is untouchable in trade talks unless people are asking whether he should be touched. The clock on this arrangement was ticking, and Bronny, for all his maturity and positive framing, had to be feeling the weight of it in a way that no press conference answer could fully hide. The fallout. By the time the 2025-26 season moved into its final stretch, the story of Bronny James and JJ Redick had become something more complicated than a simple coach-player relationship. It had become a test case for every difficult question the NBA generates when talent, legacy, money, and loyalty all collide in the same place at the same time. And the answers coming out of Los Angeles were not encouraging. Bronny's minutes had dwindled further as the season progressed. He was being passed over for playing time even as the Lakers dealt with injuries and roster fluctuations that would normally create opportunities for players in his position. The arrival of players like Marcus Smart had squeezed the backcourt rotation tighter, and Bronny had not done enough on the court to demand minutes from a coach who valued production over sentiment. The G League had become a second home. Bronny's numbers in the South Bay Lakers were noticeably better, somewhere in the range of 9.5 to 15 points per game in limited stints, but the failure to translate those performances to the NBA level was becoming a recurring and troubling pattern. It is one thing to produce in the G League. It is another thing entirely to take what you do down there and make it work against NBA defenders at NBA. Speed with NBA stakes. That translation had not happened, and the window for it to happen was not getting any wider. Redick had been blunt about this reality in his forward-looking comments. He framed Bronny's trajectory as contingent, conditional on conditioning, conditional on aggression, conditional on a willingness to operate inside his system without hesitation. Every positive statement Redick made about Bronny came with that same invisible asterisk, if. If he gets in elite shape, if he develops the .5 mentality, if he can be a disruptive defender at the NBA level. The ifs had been piling up for 2 years. Bronny, for his part, was saying the right things. In February 2026, he spoke about feeling way more comfortable and expressed confidence in himself and his teammates. "I feel different. I feel way more comfortable. My team, my teammates believe in me. My coaches believe in me." He talked about the Lakers' mindset as a group, their belief that they could be contenders and make a deep playoff run. He positioned himself as part part of that collective belief. But belief and production are two different things, and the production, measured by every available statistical tool, was not supporting the belief. His PR of 9.6 placed him well below the league average. His crafted PM of 2.6 indicated a net negative impact on the floor. His overall plus-minus of 20 across the season was the number that hurt most. It meant the Lakers were getting outscored when Bronny played, not just slightly, but consistently, by a margin that serious coaches do not ignore. In a team pushing for a playoff run, for a championship-level outcome, those numbers are not compatible with meaningful rotation minutes. The Spurs game included a specific moment Redick called out publicly. Bronny defending Victor Wembanyama on back-to-back possessions with physicality and purpose. Redick praised it specifically, pointing to two really good possessions as examples of what Bronny could be as a defender. Defense had always been the agreed-upon entry point for Bronny, the lane through which he could earn minutes before his offense was ready. Redick had talked about modeling him after two-way guards like Davion Mitchell and TJ McConnell, players who earn their spots through disruption and effort rather than offensive creation. But even by that standard, Bronny's 0.4 steals and 0.1 blocks per game were not the numbers of a disruptive defender. They were the numbers of a player who had the physical tools to be that, but had not yet assembled them consistently into something a coaching staff could rely on. The layered pressure of all of this, the statistics, the public moments, the viral clips, the G League shuttles, the tight rotation, had to be landing on Bronny in ways that were invisible to the cameras. He had grown up in a household where greatness was the baseline expectation. He had watched his father reshape the definition of what an NBA player could be, and now he was averaging 7 minutes a night and fighting for playing time against players his father's team had acquired to win a championship. The emotional complexity of that situation is not nothing. He had spoken about the father-son dynamic with real feeling in May 2025. It's a blessing, being able to learn from him, not only as a player, but as a dad. It's a different type of relationship. I try to take full advantage of it because it's something that a lot of people can't have. He said this knowing full well that the same relationship that made the opportunity possible was also the source of every nepotism conversation, every "he doesn't belong here" take, every piece of content made about whether his presence on the roster was legitimate. He also admitted, "At the start of the year, I'll just say I was under a lot of pressure. Huge difference in my confidence now." That admission was significant because it acknowledged something real. The first year had not been comfortable, not internally, not emotionally. The growth he was describing was not just athletic, it was psychological. He had to learn to separate the noise from the work, and that is harder than it sounds when the noise is specifically about whether you deserve to exist in the space you are occupying. Now, heading into what looks like a potential inflection point, a summer where decisions about roster composition, Bronny's contract trajectory, and the overall direction of the Lakers will all collide. The question of how this arrangement survives is genuinely open. The tension at the heart of this situation is not really about Bronny and Redick as individuals. It is about what happens when a development project and a championship window occupy the same roster at the same time. Development takes patience. Championship windows do not wait. And when those two things are in conflict, championship windows win every time. Redick's coaching philosophy had been built around obsession as the theme for the 2025-26 season. Daily commitment to the habits and standards that build championship-level play. That word is instructive. Obsession does not coexist well with patience for players who cannot crack the rotation. Obsession is about the ruthless pursuit of a result, and Bronny's statistical profile did not fit the result Redick was obsessing over. His relationship with Luka Doncic, the heated sideline exchange, the subsequent smoothing over, the gift of a jacket, showed Redick's capacity for high-intensity relationships with the players who mattered most to winning. Those relationships can absorb friction because the friction comes from shared investment in the same outcome. The relationship with Bronny operated on a different logic, one defined by development, by patience, by the careful management of an arrangement that was about much more than basketball. The difference between those two kinds of relationships in the end is what this entire story is about. Redick and Doncic could fight on the sideline and laugh about it the next day because they were fighting over the same thing: winning. Redick could call out LeBron for chatting with opponents because LeBron was a central piece of what winning required. But Bronny occupied a different category: the player you are developing, the player you are protecting publicly, the player whose presence on the roster was always going to generate more questions than his performance could answer. By March 2026, with the Lakers in the final stretch of the regular season and pushing toward the playoffs, offense. Bronny's role had been reduced to the margins of meaningful play. He was there, he was working, he was saying the right things, but the arrangement that had been built around him, the coaching relationship, the development program, the careful public framing, was showing the strain of 2 years of underwhelming production in an environment that did not have room for patience. The viral moments, the Bucks outburst, the .5 confrontations, the public callouts after poor performances had each been explained away individually. Redick called them tough love. Bronny called them motivation. The basketball world mostly moved on after each one, but collectively, those moments told a story that was harder to explain away. A coach who had committed publicly to a player's development, running out of ways to justify the commitment against the evidence of the games. Bronny had shown in flashes: the career-high 17 against the Bucks in year 1, the Spurs game in year 2, the occasional defensive stand that made Redick nod from the sideline, that the physical talent was real, the athleticism was real, the defensive potential was real. The question was never whether those things existed. The question was whether they would ever stack up consistently into something an NBA team could use in moments that mattered. The story is not over. Bronny is 21 years old. He has 2 years left on his contract after this season. The Lakers have publicly committed to keeping him. Redick has publicly committed to developing him. All of those things are true simultaneously, but the relationship between a coach and a player that started with warm words about case study 1 and earned opportunities had been tested repeatedly and visibly by the gap between the promise and the reality. And however it resolves, whether Bronny eventually earns his minutes or whether the arrangement quietly unravels under the weight of its own contradictions, the story of what happened between these two men in the first 2 years of this experiment is already complete enough to understand. And that arithmetic does not care about legacies. It does not care about podcasts. It does not care about who your father is, or who your coach's best friend is, or how much everyone wants the story to have a happy ending. It only cares about what happens on the court. And on the court, as of early March 2026, the story of Bronny James and JJ Redick was still being written, with more questions than answers, and more pressure than either of them had bargained for when this whole thing started. Found this information exciting and unbelievable? Be sure to check out other similar and amazing videos on the screen. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you in the next video.